I understand what you're saying, Trent. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have enough reason to believe in the resurrection. I'm saying specifically the claim that you have as much good reason to believe that Jesus was alive before the crucifixion as afterwards.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. Beautiful people, grab a seat because this one is a treat. Today we're sitting in on a heavyweight clash between Alex O'Connor and Trent Horn, and the subject is the big one. Did Jesus actually physically rise from the dead? Trent comes in swinging with the classic apologetic playbook, the empty tomb, the martyrs, the conversions, and Alex just calmly pulls every thread until the whole sweater starts unraveling. What looks like a friendly chat slowly turns into one of the cleanest dismantlings of the resurrection case you'll ever hear. And trust me, you'll want to stick around to the finish, because the strongest stuff lands late. That's where Alex drops the explanation that hits harder than anything Trent brought to the table. Before we get rolling, drop a quick comment and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing how far this community reaches. Alright, enough from me. Let's get into it.
Trent said earlier at the very beginning of this debate, he said, the evidence that Jesus was alive after his death is as good as the evidence that he was alive before his death. I don't know if that's what you believe or if it just sort of came out that way.
Well, I think I meant to say that there are similar kinds of ways to verify that. Just you could show someone's alive by people saying we saw him.
Sure, but I just don't think it's true, because of course one of the reasons why we're so certain of Jesus' existence is a relatively speaking for the ancient world, a wealth of extra biblical sources by supporters, by opponents, just referencing the existence of this person. Of course, we don't have any references to appearances to Jesus after his death outside of what could be apologetical material, but certainly is material of his supporters, including some events which you might suspect have some attention drawn to them elsewhere, such as the appearance of the 500 in Paul.
Well, it would be very hard to find non-Christian testimony of a Christian fact like the resurrection, because if one were convicted of that fact.
I'm not just looking for that. I'm looking for so, for example, in Jesus' sort of lifetime, we have sort of people who believe. You could have an extra biblical source that people believed 500 people had seen Jesus. You could have an extra biblical source that says 500 people claim to see Jesus. In fact, even if we had, if we discovered a historical source that just corroborated the 500, wasn't an eyewitness testimony, but just said, and 500 people, and here were some of their names, and here's where it occurred, claimed to see Jesus, I would see that as incredible evidence for the resurrection. Not because it needs to be something that an opponent couldn't have written, but just because it would be something that's like corroborating. It shows that there is an event which was known to other people.
I don't know, Alex. I think because you might just say, well, Tacitus or someone else just got this from someone who read Paul, and so there might be questions about whether it's independently attested. But the 500, by the way, the 500. I would say, this is a mysterious thing. I think what makes a lot of sense of it is in Matthew 28, that's where we talk about those who doubted in the appearance on the mountain or the hilltop in Galilee. I think it very well could be, because there is the description of talking about might go and appear to my brothers and other, those, described in Mark and in Matthew. And we have that fulfillment there. And that would make sense if there were, especially if you had the Sermon on the Mount, right? You're on a mount. That's how hundreds of people can hear you in the ancient world when you're talking to them. I've been to that area in Galilee myself.
Me too.
That would make sense that, okay, so we have a large enough area for someone to see someone like that. And that would explain, if you have 500 people, those who didn't know Jesus as well, those could be the doubters versus those who knew him very well.
The only point that I'm making is that I don't know if I would say that about that evidence. I have no idea. But what I'm saying is that when you say that we have just as good reasons to think that he was alive before the crucifixion as after, I just don't think that's true. We might have just as good sort of testimony from the Gospels maybe, but the thing that makes the historical Jesus case so strong and undeniable is the extra biblical material. You don't have any of that for the post-resurrection appearances.
Maybe because I would still find the evidence from the Gospels and Paul's letters to Jesus existing to be enough. But for me, it's like, okay, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, it becomes much more difficult to explain why James, who didn't believe, converted, why Paul, who was a persecutor, converted, and why all of these scared and frightened apostles boldly proclaim this truth. I think it fulfills that explanatory datum here very well.
I understand what you're saying, Trent. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have enough reason to believe in the resurrection. I'm saying specifically the claim that you have as much good reason to believe that Jesus was alive before the crucifixion as afterwards.
Sure. Hey, I'm willing to dial that. I'm willing to trade that one for you're reasonable to believe in the resurrection.
Secondly,
I'm willing to I'll make a trade on that.
Secondly, I find it really important when people talk about the persecution of the apostles. You kind of get this merging between people like Peter and people like Paul. Earlier you were talking about how the persecution of the apostles is clear. If you look at Paul's letters, he talks very clearly about the persecutions he underwent, certainly so. But remember what Paul saw. Remember the nature of Paul's experience. It's a flash of light. Paul did not meet the bodily resurrected Jesus, and that's the claim that we're discussing, whether Jesus bodily resurrected from the dead. I don't want to say admit, you just assert, as well as anyone else could, that people can happily die for things that they think are true, but didn't see themselves. The whole point is that they need to have seen it themselves, and Paul did not see a bodily resurrected Jesus.
This is the exact moment the resurrection case starts cracking, and a lot of people watching will breeze right past it. Trent walks in treating the evidence that Jesus rose as if it sits on the same shelf as the evidence Jesus simply existed, and Alex refuses to let that slide. You have to understand the move Alex is making. Historians are confident Jesus was a real person because you have sources outside the Bible, supporters and critics alike, all pointing at the same man. Alex said this: "The thing that makes the historical Jesus case so strong and undeniable is the extra-biblical material, and you don't have any of that for the post-resurrection appearances. And that line quietly destroys the equivalence. Existence and resurrection are not the same tier of claim, and treating them as equal is how a miracle gets smuggled in through the back door." Then Trent reaches for the old reliable. Trent said this: "If Jesus did not rise from the dead, it becomes much more difficult to explain why James, who didn't believe, converted, and why Paul, who was a persecutor, converted. And here's what people miss. Humans change their minds about enormous things constantly. No walking corpse required. Sincerity is not proof. A converted heart tells you someone believes, not that the belief is correct." Now watch the part that genuinely surprised me. Alex narrows everything to one precise claim, and Trent gives ground on the spot. Trent said this: "I'm willing to dial that. I'm willing to trade that one." He conceded live on camera. That almost never happens in these debates. And then Alex lands the blow that reframes the whole night. Alex said this: "It's a flash of light. Paul did not meet the bodily resurrected Jesus. The most celebrated convert in the entire faith built his mission on a blinding light on a road, not on shaking hands with a risen man."
Who's the earliest martyr? Who's the earliest Christian martyr?
Probably
Stephen or James.
Stephen would be the first martyr, and then James's description in Acts chapter 12.
It's Stephen, okay? And what is Stephen martyred for? Having a vision in the sky. He looks up and he sees Jesus stood or sat at the right hand of the Father, and he's stoned to death for it. The earliest martyrdom story we have is of a vision. The most obvious persecution that we have firsthand is that of Paul, whose experience was that of a vision. The idea of the physical resurrection of Jesus, even if we agree that Peter was persecuted, we don't know what it is that Peter saw. Yeah, we have some second, third-hand accounts from the Gospels. That's if you believe the traditional authorship. But that's not the same thing as saying that we know for a fact that an eyewitness to a specific event was persecuted for belief in that event. Even with James, we don't know why he was put to death. Surely, the most plausible conclusion is that he was preaching Christianity. Herod says that this was pleasing to the Jews when he kills James, but we just don't know the details. At least not strongly enough for me to believe in a miracle.
Josephus says that he was stoned to death for being a lawbreaker, and he's specifically referenced in Josephus as the brother of Christ, the one who is called Christ.
Yes, I understand that, but we just don't know the details of the reasons behind the martyrdom of this apostle, I think. Although, look, this is maybe a question for Sean McDowell. I just want to say that on the point of persecution, we need to be very careful about who we're talking about and keep it separate. Let's not say, look, we know that the apostles were persecuted because look at the letters of Paul. And we know that Paul was persecuted.
But it's not just that. We also have the testimony in the book of Acts, and we also have Tacitus talking about the Neronian persecution.
But then that's not firsthand. Right, you understand what I'm saying? Is that
it doesn't necessarily have to be firsthand, because I think there's good evidence that Luke was a traveling companion of Paul and that he's a good historian.
Is that because of the we passages?
Yeah, I think that's one element to it, and I've read the critiques of people trying to say that's some kind of seagoing narrative motif, and I think there's very
I wasn't going to go down that route.
That.
I was just going to say that, do you therefore reject the traditional authorship of John's Gospel? Because near the end of John's Gospel, in John chapter 20, the beloved disciple is referred to seeing something, and the author of John's Gospel says, and we know that his testimony is true. And given that we passages mean that it's speaking in the first person, that means that John was not authored by the beloved disciple, right?
It is possible that John was authored by someone else, like John the Presbyter, that was part of the Johannine community. So I do think it provides other evidence. I don't think it's as strong as Luke, for example. But that's why, as I said before, I think that you don't want to take a dogmatic view when you're making a historical case.
Yes.
You're going to weigh things a little bit. And so
it's important because, I mean, John asked about the empty tomb, which I didn't have a chance to speak about. I wanted to, I mean, a moment ago you said that, look, it's important to ask, what would you expect if it were true? And I agree with you. The data fits with what would happen if it were true. What I'm saying is it also fits with what would happen if it were not true. And in that position as an agnostic, I'm not going to believe in the resurrection, right? It might not be enough for a Christian to abandon faith.
Okay.
But I believe it. I believe it does because I think there are other explanations. For example, looking at the empty tomb, this is really important, right? The empty tomb is like a key point here. Like, okay, I don't know if there was an empty tomb. I mean, I think just like prima facie, I have some suspicion that a member of the Sanhedrin could just like ask Pilate to take the body off the cross and like keep it for himself, when typically Romans would leave bodies on the cross as evidence of crucifixion. Maybe because it was a Jewish holiday. I mean, they say it's because of the Jewish holiday they take them down from the cross, as if Pilate cares about Jewish holidays. Maybe he does because he doesn't want to like incite a riot or something. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But let's just say that there were some kind of tomb. What's the nature of this tomb? We're told it's Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, only in Matthew's gospel. John's gospel seems to imply that it's specifically not Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. In fact, in John chapter 19, verse 38, it's Joseph and Nicodemus who are taking the body of Jesus.
Okay, this stretch is where the martyrdom argument completely collapses, and you need to watch it closely because this is the apologist's favorite weapon. The pitch sounds powerful. The apostles died for what they saw, so it must be real. Alex takes it apart brick by brick. He starts with the very first Christian to be killed. Alex said this, having a vision in the sky, he looks up and he sees Jesus, and he's stoned to death for it. The earliest martyrdom story we have is of a vision. Let me break down why that lands so hard. A vision is not a body. Devoted people have died for visions and convictions in every religion that has ever existed. If dying for a heavenly experience proved the experience was real, then every contradictory faith on earth would be true at once, and that is impossible. Then Alex moves to Peter, the name apologists lean on the hardest. Alex said this, even if we agree that Peter was persecuted, we don't know what it is that Peter saw. That is the crack running through the whole foundation. You cannot claim a man died for witnessing a physical resurrection when you cannot even establish what he witnessed. And when Trent tries to shore it up with the book of Acts and a Roman historian, Alex slices through with one short question. Alex said this, but then that's not firsthand, right? That single line ends the point. And here's what earns my respect the most. Alex isn't even claiming to have disproven anything. Alex said this, the data fits with what would happen if it were true, but it also fits with what would happen if it were not true. That is honesty. He refuses to fake a certainty he doesn't have, which is exactly the standard the other side keeps demanding from everyone except itself.
And it says, at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, this is the day before the Sabbath. So they had to solve this problem before the Sabbath began, that is, before Friday night. And there's this tomb that happens to be nearby. What do you think of the odds that a wealthy aristocrat like Joseph of Arimathea would own a tomb, not on his property, but near a crucifixion site for Roman criminals? That seems extremely unlikely. What's more likely is what John tells us, which is that there was a tomb nearby.
Tombs would be outside the city. It's an unclean site. And that's exactly what we find when we do archaeological investigations of Jerusalem. And you would have people executed outside of the city, outside of the gates.
I think what John is telling, yeah, but in terms of where you would put the remains, I think if Joseph owns a tomb, it's unlikely to be near this site of crucifixion. And in fact, I think John's gospel is telling us that by saying that it's because it's the day of Jewish preparation. It doesn't. If this was just Joseph's tomb, why would it be because it was the Jewish day of preparation and since the tomb was nearby, they put Jesus there? It seems to me that this is like an emergency burial in time for the Sabbath. When does the Sabbath end? It ends on Saturday night. So then the burial party come to this emergency tomb, take the body of Jesus and give it a proper burial. Early that morning, when it's still dark, so a few hours later, Mary comes along, sees an empty tomb, sees that the stone has already been rolled away, and says what? She assumes that the body has been taken. So there are two hypotheses here. One is that it's stolen. Some people think the body is stolen. We have good evidence for the stealing of bodies in the ancient world. You'll know about the Nazareth inscription, a 1st century Greek sort of legal inscription from an unknown Roman emperor, which issues the death penalty for people who steal bodies and tamper with tombs. So we know that in the ancient world, people were stealing bodies. We also have epitaphs on Jewish graves cursing people who steal bodies. We know that the stealing of bodies was something done popularly enough that they had to warn against it. We also know, of course, about the polemic in Matthew's Gospel, which specifically says that there is a rumor that Jesus' body has been stolen. People are obviously believing this even by the time of the writing of Matthew's Gospel. But it doesn't have to be. And you ask, well, who would steal it? One of the reasons people stole bodies was for use in like magical incantations, like magicians and the like. And of course, they specifically wanted people who'd undergone violent deaths, and the idea of a holy man who'd undergone a violent death would just be too tempting to give up. But even if you don't want to believe that, there's also the fact that the burial party of Jesus is said in John's Gospel to have given him emergency burial right nearby the place because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and it's after the Sabbath that the tomb is now empty, and Mary Magdalene sees the tomb, and her first thought is that they've taken the Lord, and we do not know where they have put him. Like, I'm not going to say that the body was taken. I don't even know if there was an empty tomb, but if there were, the idea that it was taken either by a grave robber or by the burial party of Joseph of Arimathea is exceptionally more likely to me than that Jesus rose from the dead. Again, I won't say it didn't happen. I just want to say that that's a skeptical scenario, which seems to me perfectly plausible, since you asked about the empty tomb.
Trent, can I just give you a few minutes to respond to those claims about the empty tomb?
And this is where Alex calmly shuts the whole thing down. The empty tomb is supposed to be the apologist's trump card, the single fact they insist can only be explained by a miracle. Watch what Alex does. He won't even concede there definitely was an empty tomb, and he still hands you a cleaner explanation than a man rising from the dead. He opens by questioning the entire setup. Alex said this: "What do you think are the odds that a wealthy aristocrat like Joseph would own a tomb not on his property but near a crucifixion site for Roman criminals?" The moment you say that out loud, the storybook version starts to fall apart. Then comes the reconstruction that genuinely got me. Alex said this: "This is like an emergency burial in time for the Sabbath. Picture the clock. They have only hours before everything shuts down. There happens to be a tomb close by, so they stash the body fast, fully intending to move it later. And before anyone comes back, here is the first human reaction to that open tomb." Alex said this about Mary: "She assumes that the body has been taken, not risen, taken. The earliest instinct of the first witness was that someone moved a corpse." Now the educational piece, because this is documented history, not speculation. There is a real artifact called the Nazareth inscription, a 1st century stone tablet, and Alex said this: "It issues the death penalty for people who steal bodies and tamper with tombs." Ask yourself why any government would threaten execution over stealing corpses, unless grave robbing was common enough to be a genuine problem. It was. Missing bodies in that time and place were not a cosmic mystery, they were a known crime. And then Alex closes it. Alex said this: "The idea that it was taken either by a grave robber or by the burial party is exceptionally more likely to me than that Jesus rose from the dead." And he is right. When an ordinary explanation sits right beside a supernatural one, the burden never falls on the skeptic. It falls on the person claiming the laws of nature snapped in half. Alex never once said it didn't happen. He just refused to sprint to a miracle when a rush burial and a stolen body explain every detail. That isn't close-minded. That is how careful thinking works. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.